And from that raw text, we have the formal theology that goes through committees and experts, and we have a lot of creative, emotive expression, hymns, poetry, and such. And we also have the pop theology and unwritten informal doctrine that actually is quite a problem. And we also have midrash, and that's, I'll call it Adventist midrash, a creative, cerebral expression that there's just a tremendous volume of it. All of these are influenced by the world outside of Adventism, culture, technology, economics, political, and other ideas. So, but it's the midrash that is a problem, and it pops up all over the church, particularly in publishing. So the early church stressed value in publishing. I mean, James White was putting out a newsletter even before 1844. Oh, no, Joshua Himes was. Uh, so we build publishing houses that produced magazines, tracts, and books, but sometimes the capacity uh, exceeds available content, and that creates an interesting situation. And as the printed word went out, there became demand for artwork and photography, and that's a whole history in itself. But a friend of mine at the Voice of Prophecy told me that uh, royalties from publishing are the only approved way for ministers to supplement their income. So that's interesting. I'm sure they do other things outside, like real estate. So the market demand stimulates content writers, and some of it is very mediocre and some speculative. And so there's some marginal speculative theology, and the history of publishing is full of that. Here's one article in on the solemn work of recording angels to minute detail. So the Adventist midrash occurs in three forms. One is what is said in the pulpit, and I've heard some really absurd things from the pulpit. Uh, the expression by volume, if we look at the Bible, which is a pretty tight document compared to the writings of Ellen White, and they have contributed to this midrash that is very, very hard to grasp because there's so much of it. We are really energetic at publishing journals and all over the place. And another part of that midrash is extemporaneous comments by Bible teachers in academy, and they're never voted, they're never governed by any kind of editor, but they may make a lasting impression on the poor student. So Midrash has both recorded and preserved versions like journals and books and broadcasts and to a certain extent blogs and essays. And there's a lot of midrash that's lost. The sermons, the local radio broadcasts, the classroom instruction, and pastoral counseling. And from this midrash comes a lot of pop doctrines, widely believed at grassroots, yet no supporting scholarship, and often with little or no objective critical review. Just some examples. I have actually have 2 hours of material on the pop doctrines. The first is the Bible is inerrant when read concretely. The second is Ellen White's writings are inerrant and authoritative and timeless. The third, particularly egregious, is salvation is difficult and precarious. And that idea permeated early Adventism. Your sins make you abhorrent to God. Salvation by works and strict obedience was important. Divine temporal activism, and that's a very interesting topic. Whether God is micromanaging our lives and the environment around us. Uh, correct belief is essential for salvation, and there's several more, but those are the most problematic. Now, the history of publishing in Adventism, and we got to break it down. There's the printing house, the writers, the editors, the press operations, and the marketing. And then there's the distribution of material. This is kind of marketing 101. Journals by mail, door-to-door selling, canvassing, call porter work. Uh, there's retail, and that has shrunk tremendously. I'll show you why. And then there's free distribution of tracts and books and magazines and things like that. And of course, we're indebted to Gutenberg for all the technology that we have on paper. So even before the Great Disappointment, the Midnight Cry was published out of New York City. And after the Great Disappointment, Present Truth was, I don't know why James White was in Middletown, Connecticut, but they put out at least 19 issues there. And then he started the Review and Herald up in Paris, Maine. And the youth instructor he started in Rochester, New York, and I have a personal connection to that early journal. And then the Health Reformer came out of Battle Creek, Michigan in about 1868. So the Midnight Cry, Joshua Himes, price 2 cents. This is uh, published in New York, November 17, 1842. Present Truth, published by James White, and the lead essay is The Sabbath was instituted at creation, not at Sinai. And the Sabbath and the correct Sabbath and how to behave on Sabbath is the dominant theme of early Adventist publishing, proving which day was correct. As the Review and Herald progressed, uh, here is a plea for more donations. The operation was financially precarious. There were two men in the office that worked for 6 months with barely a trifle more than their board. And and here is the start of employee policy. They deserve a comfortable support, and that's a whole topic. So then, launched in 1851 was the youth instructor, and all of these early journals, the first item on the left column at the top of the journal is always poetry, and I'm still trying to figure out why that is. But anyway, for a while, James White was editor of both the Review and Herald and the Youth Instructor, so he was a hard-working guy. The Health Reformer came out of Battle Creek. The opening, the opening article is about digestion. Now that's going to move it off the news racks for sure. So I originally started this whole material about 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, because I was fascinated with the evolution of the cover design and the ornamentation. The Review and Herald has gone through a number of designs of the cover. It was at most extreme in 1909, that really over the top cover the design. All of a sudden, it went to sans serif type on the, and then to different forms of. I'm skipping a lot, and they finally got to color in 1998. The youth instructor went through a similar evolution with the ornamentation at the top, and finally in 1908, a full page ornamentation of their cover page, and then it kind of thinned out to where they just before they closed shop, they had color photos on the cover. The Signs of the Times, way out in Oakland, went through a similar evolution, and in 1913 they had the most ornamental cover, and then it thinned out again. They used a lot of photography and eventually a color They had a color press, and this is what they look like today. The key themes and messages of early Adventist publication was that Christ was coming, but delayed. The seventh day of the week is the proper Sabbath. Proper Sabbath keeping is important even for salvation. And later they added temperance to the message. And so what's missing? Grace. Salvation is an unconditional gift. That I just do not see very much in early Adventist publishing. Uh, Tracts were a big deal, and here's even a way encouraging us to learn how to use tracts. So if you're on the train, coach, you can go up and down the aisle handing a tract to passengers. I don't know how effective that is. Tracts and letters are easy to do. There's no awkward personal involvement. You don't even have to make eye contact, but you've done your duty. And duty was a big issue in much of Adventist history. So why the emphasis on publishing? Because a process is easier to measure than an outcome. And so the potential audience is not always the actual audience, and that's true for publishing, and it's true for radio and TV. The potential audience is big, but the effective audience may be shrinking. Understanding your audience is terribly important in creating expression and communication. Their literacy, their numeracy, how they perceive symbols, values, triggers, and even dog whistles. A couple weeks ago, I had eye surgery. I got in a message from the hospital, a copy of my EKG, which I appreciate. That's raw data, and I appreciate the full disclosure, but I'm not equipped to read that EKG squiggle. So is it useful to me? I'm not a physician, no, but I guess I appreciate them sending it to me until I realized well, first of all, we understand that hospitals are very complex organizations, but then I looked at the tracing and they have the wrong month on the EKG. It was June 24. They cut into my eye, not April 24. So feedback is important and for any kind of expression. The highest level of feedback is dialogue with eye contact, and you get this in a Bible study or counseling or things like that. Uh, Lower level of feedback is the teacher in the classroom. And I use the expression reading the room. I have sat in this building watching teachers talking to the wall behind the students. They just weren't connecting with the students. It's an intuitive thing, and it's terribly important. I won't go further on that. The same thing in a sermon. I've seen preachers that just aren't connecting. Well, the church room is larger, and it's hard to read the people in the back of the room. I understand that, but the least amount of feedback comes from publishing and broadcasting. And so authors and editors are often in their own religious and cultural bubble when they create content. Kinds of feedback, eye contact and facial expressions, Q&A in an oral session. That's why I enjoy the Q&A. Informal comments in an unstructured event, letters and email, focus groups, surveys, observed behavior, desired behavior and undesired behavior, and donations are a form of feedback. So in the Review and Herald, March 31, 1852, they printed the names of all of the authors of all the letters they got in feedback to the previous issue, which is a lot of work typesetting this thing before linotype. And they acknowledged the letters even if not printed, and then they acknowledged the donations and the amounts, even down to 20 cents was acknowledged in this usually is the last page of the Review and Herald. So, well, what concerns me is the pressure of weekly deadlines may have caused the standards of content to lower, and authors may have pushed the limit of speculation in their exegesis of scripture. of course, using the proof text method. So I'm seeing a lot of speculation. For example, there's a series of 20 essays on the investigative judgment and the precise sequence of events. That was in 1869. Way over the top speculation. A series of 8 essays on the different kinds of angels. And after tragedies occur, like September 11, pressure, ministers, everyone feels pressure to bring meaning to those events. And some of it is triggered by bad theology. In Southern Tidings, after the September 11 attack, the author speculated, I can imagine that upon seeing our anguish, the angels in heaven once again urged Jesus to come and put an end to this chaotic world. Let's return to earth and get the faithful, somebody says. Jesus says, if we wait another day, maybe someone will choose eternal life. Now, what does this say about soteriology right there? And I believe that just the thought of being able to save another person, this is the author speaking now, another one of us, everyone in heaven agrees to wait a little longer. Uh, Boy, we could have quite a debate just on that theology. So the publishing houses started with Review and Herald in Rochester, then in Battle Creek, and then they moved to Tacoma Park and then to Hagerstown, Maryland. Pacific Press started in Oakland. They moved to Mountain View, and now they're somewhere in Idaho. The next publishing house was actually in Australia, the Signs of the Times, and then the next one was in Stanborough, England in 1890, the Oriental Watchman in India, and after all that, Southern Pub came in 1901 in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, Southern Pub um, uh, merged with the Review and Herald sometime before 1980. They maintained dual operations, but eventually rolled everything up into the Review and Herald. And of course, I can't talk about the history of publishing without mentioning the fire at Battle Creek. Somebody actually was able to take a photo of it, or that may be a colorized photo. And of course, there's a terrific illustration of the burning of the Battle Creek office of the Review and Herald on the Review cover in 1977. Very effective illustration. The Southern Pub was in Nashville. I found this photo in the Southern Union Worker, which later became Southern Tidings, and this aerial photo. And a good institution has a powerhouse with a smokestack and smoke coming out of it. This was how it appeared to the illustrator in 1924. The last known address of Southern Pub was at here on Elm Hill Pike. And when you look at this building, it's owned by somebody else. But if you look at the structure, that tells me that that is a chapel with stained glass windows, um, because that was one characteristic of Adventist institutions was you always had to have a chapel for worship services before people went to work. So I'm going to expand the scope for just a minute and talk about mass media, both institutional, paper-based publishing, and web-based publishing. And there's grassroots streaming and web communication, which has exploded in the last 20 years, out of control of the brethren. And there was also broadcast content, radio, TV, audio, and visual. I became acquainted with the Voice of Prophecy when I lived right up the street, and I would go inside and talk to my friends who were developing programming. In fact, I actually recorded some voices for some of their material. The VOP had to move out to Adventist Media Center in Thousand Oaks in 1979. The goal was to have a lot of shared services and cut costs, but the overhead of these new buildings actually added to the cost of operation. That's what I was told. I haven't seen the financial statements. Um, so that was the media center up through, I'd say 1985 or something like that. And from the air, there was a Voice of Prophecy building, there was a Faith for Today building, and a large studio with a high ceiling that they could use for TV or film, and there was an administration building. That was sold, and they moved to Simi Valley, but the buildings remained. And uh, in what was let me okay. They sold the facility to Amgen Corporation, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies, uh, $33 billion in revenue. I went to two job interviews for Amgen. They treated me very well, put me up in a nice hotel, and ran me around in these little golf carts. And one of the interviews was on the second floor of the old Voice of Prophecy building, right, that we see right here. And I'm going up the stairs, same carpet, same walls, but totally different organization. I'm thinking, this is weird. So yeah, my job interview in 2004. I snuck a photo of the old Faith for Today building. It was another Amgen bureaucracy. This is what the property looks like today. There are no buildings there. I don't know when they raised everything or who owns the property. I haven't had time to do that. But from an aerial point of view, you see that there's some mounds of dirt. Those may be toxic chemicals taken out of the dirt. I don't know. Covered with tar paper. This is the aerial view on Google. So the property is no more. That just fascinates me. Going back through history, the Pacific Press in Oakland had this building, and they got the entire staff to come out for a group photo. And they were putting out a lot of material. Look at the prices for some of these books and pamphlets, down to 60 cents or less. In 1905, the Pacific Press, feeling the urban encroachment of Oakland, moved everything down to a very rural place called Mountain View. And they built all their facilities there. But in April 18, the great San Francisco earthquake uh, pretty much destroyed a lot of San Francisco, but it also destroyed the end of the main building at Pacific Press. You can see the opening to their upstairs uh, rooms, the west end of the office. Yeah, we're looking into their chapel. They incorporated the chapel into the building. Well, they built a wooden structure to mimic the original bureaucracy, and that's fine. It was, and but on August in July 21, that structure burned down, and the photographer happened to take his camera home, so it wasn't lost in the fire, and he was able to take some photos. So this was on the cover page of Signs of the Times. They had to have a big fundraising effort to uh, to replace the building. Uh, they were publishing in a lot of languages. Notice the 1/4 cent price on the tracts. So I guess if you have to uh, purchase them in bundles of 100 or something like that. The primary distribution mechanism was colporteuring. And here's an Ohio Colporteuring Institute in 1938 in January. I guess they do it in winter. And colporteurs got a lot of ink in Adventist publications. Here in the Atlantic Union Gleaner in 1935, every week they listed the names and how much they sold that week. So there was a lot of competition going on for the colporteurs, and uh, and I've wondered what became of all these people. Well, the women are difficult to track down, so I did a little search for obituaries for some of these people, because if they had an obituary, then they probably stayed in the faith. But that research is unfinished. Um, if maybe some graduate student would like to pursue it. But the colporteur was even a non-Adventist concept in American society, and there's still some notion of it today. But the problem is people aren't at home anymore. Everybody's working. Um, it was also called the bookwork. In this, excuse me, uh, in this issue of the review, uh, a woman lost her husband. She was at Graysville, Tennessee, which was the predecessor of Southern Missionary College. But her husband was down in Central America engaged in the bookwork. And he was working and she died at Graysville. Okay. So for a family to be separated by the urgency of the bookwork, I find very interesting. The Pacific Union Recorder, 1945, even January, when a lot of the men were in the military, we still had a lot of colporteurs in the Pacific Union Conference, and we were training them. Gospel Sales School in Berkeley, California, again in January. In 1947, Southern Tidings listed 300 colporteurs and their individual statistics, noting that there was a separate section for colored workers. In the 2015 edition of Southern Tidings, I don't see any mention of colporteurs. So if I had to intuitively draw the curve of canvassing, it peaked out in the 1920s and 1930s and then faded away in the modern society. Fewer Americans are at home, and there is a decline in reading with competition to alternative media. So the publishing assumptions that if you print it and you distribute it, they will read it. You've heard the expression, scatter the pages of truth like the leaves of autumn. Well, where are the feedback mechanisms? Do responding letters reflect overall impressions, or will readers who react negatively to the material you left on their doorstep bother to write? The leaves of autumn and scattering the literature took on this illustration. Where is this? A Central Union Reaper in 1932. This is a brute force of expression and hopefully communication. Back in 1860, I'm going to jump around time-wise here. Back in 1860, an average of 86 letters were received at the Adventist Review per week. Not all of them were printed, and even those that were printed may have been edited down. They make interesting reading, but for me, not as interesting as the grassroots obituary. If I were to chart certain doctrinal emphasis, I would place legalism and the precariousness of salvation at the top, but waning somewhat, and the understanding of grace as very minimal in the history of Adventism until recently. And the influence of Ellen White, I would chart like that. Really took off after her death, and that's a whole other topic. Gil Valentine, bless his heart, said she was idealized, sanitized, and canonized. And we're now in a point where uh, uh, her writings are considered inerrant, and much of this happened after her death. 4 generations of Adventists now in North America have been taught about Ellen White's inerrancy and authority, and that is a latent problem in um, the church today. Inerrancy has become a non-negotiable doctrine, and I remember Ray Cottrell one Saturday night, we were eating popcorn, and he said, any new light must not contradict what she has written, and I'll put in as we interpret it. So that is a significant change in the history of Adventism. I found in 1918, this is 2.5 years after she died, a column in the Review and Herald, um, studies in testimonies, and there was question and then an answer the answers came entirely from her writing, not from scripture. So no citations or quotes from the Bible. So this to me is evidence of canonization even 3 years after her death. The problem with lifting quotes is the missing metadata. Each unit of text should have some metadata, when she wrote it and the circumstances, and who was the intended audience, one person or the brethren in committee facing a specific decision, or a class of workers, or is it intended for everyone, everywhere, in all circumstances? Not all statements are created equal, but the lifting process uh, uh, prevents her from maturing over time. And Ron Grable has talked about this in his book, Visions and Revisions. So we have her immediate publications, and normally in the 1860s and 1870s, she was writing a weekly column for Signs of the Times, for example. And I would imagine that came from her hand, and that was her personal product, and it was all from her. But then we started doing compilations, and she oversaw some of that. But there was already an assumption of verbal inerrancy. After her death, the compilations continued. Uh, they incorporated letters from external, from other, received by other people, and this just increased the severity of the assumption of verbal inerrancy. Now, uh, sources of and authors of textual material in the Review and Herald, and even in the Youth Instructor in Signs of the Times. Obviously, they're going to draw from Adventist sources where they can, and also the grassroots content creation, particularly the obituaries, announcements, and letters to the editor. Those are come out of the Adventist culture, but the non-Adventist sources are fascinating. The extent. Uh, in an early issue in 1861, the Review printed an article from Scientific American magazine about the causes of the American Civil War. So all these other sources, mostly attributed if they're full articles, but many news items not attributed. They also quote authorities and influencers in speeches or written essays, politicians and academics, and a lot of non-Adventist clerics. I can't name them off the top of my head. So in producing the journals, they had to draw from a lot of sources, including captains of industry. So again, my model of going from expression to communication, the process versus outcomes, we've got to understand that difference. In modern society and the media market, I think the receptivity for printed material has declined, whereas the competition, starting with radio, the competition for attention has gone way up. How do you read? How often do you read a newspaper? This chart shows the uh, percentage of population reading steady decline since 1980. This comes out of the University of Chicago. So the fragmentation of media started with the newspapers, and forgive me if some of you have seen this before, and then magazines like Time and Life and Newsweek, and then broadcast radio and TV, and then later cable TV, which expanded the number of channels available. I remember where I was first time I saw CNN headline news in a hotel in Phoenix, and then the explosion of volume of web delivery of content. And so there's this tremendous increase in content, whereas in early Adventism, uh, many of the members got the review in the mail weekly, and there was just the local newspapers in the Post. Adventists don't read anymore. Uh, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, there were all these book and Bible houses or Adventist book centers in Southern California. Now the only one left is in Glendale on Chevy Chase. So the Review and Herald, the Youth Instructor, which gave way to Insight magazine, that's gone now. Signs of the Times, the Pacific Union Recorder, but also in the market were Collier's and Saturday Evening Post and the National Geographic. And anybody wants 700 pounds of National Geographic, you supply the truck and I will give them to you. Um, and then AM and radio broadcasting and TV. So between 1884, 85, and 1920, I would say that was the golden age of Adventist journals with little competition and a high ink to member ratio. And I'll illustrate this. The expansion of the publishing industry in variety and content, the ink to member ratio, particularly in the Union Conference papers like the Gleaners and the Tidings and the Recorders. Here's an example from the Atlantic Union Gleaner. Uh, Two students attending Washington Missionary College spent vacations at their home in Buffalo. Uh, Misters Sanders and Specht of Rochester, who were drafted, have been assigned to the hospital court Fort Dix. Now, I appreciate the attention that the Adventist Church has given to its troops who in both wars who were drafted. This is one of the very good things that the church has done. In the Central Union Reaper, Miss Watson from Sioux City visited her niece and nephew over the weekend. But the clincher is the boys at Oak Park, and that's an academy, are enjoying the use of a new basketball. So the smallest things got inked in these journals. They had more capacity than they had really important content. Uh, we've established publishing houses in every country. That was part of the model of reaching every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. And so some of them are pretty small. And we also produced for two audiences. And I would classify periodicals as inward facing and outward facing. And there's an important distinction because inward facing journals will have some frank discussion of internal denominational issues as well as letters to the editor that, about church issues, which are very candid. Whereas outward facing are mostly written for non Adventists and crafted for general appeal. The Signs of the Times was inward facing until the Union papers started, and then it became outward or outward facing. But some members don't understand the difference. Literature is literature to them, and they distribute internal material to the public. I don't think that is wise. And an example of that is all the literature requests that we see. This was in 1958 Review and Herald. For many people, literature is literature. Each of the divisions developed their own journals. They're almost always in English. Here's the Far Eastern Division Outlook, published first from Shanghai and then to Hong Kong. And they had some interesting graphics. There was a concept in the 30s called Big Week, which was a emphasis for uh, fundraising and distribution of literature. And here it's June 14 to 22. This is 1924. But this visual image of spreading published material over the entire world, that was very persistent. Well, the Far Eastern Division Outlook, of course, stopped publication during the Japanese capture of Hong Kong and Singapore, and it didn't start again until the Philippines were and Singapore was liberated at the end of World War II. Another example, the South African Division Outlook. And these are all in English, by the way, which is an interesting issue, except, and this is the only journal that I saw that had a second language. And I cannot pronounce this. This is probably Afrikaans, and Smuts could read this fluently, but he doesn't have his microphone turned on. So uh, th this I found interesting. So Ellen White died in 1915. The Review, the Youth Instructor, and then Insight. The Signs of the Times was weekly until the 1950s, and then it went monthly. That's an important clue. The Union Conference uh, journals grew through the 60s, and then they faded away. I have metrics for that. And again, because television viewership and the internet stole the audience. So the North Pacific Union Gleaner was weekly until 1970, bi-weekly, then monthly, and then bi-monthly after 2016. I, for a while, subscribed to Bloomberg Business Week. It is now a monthly journal. I canceled my subscription. Because I need, if I need that information, I need it weekly for my economics work. But they kept the same title, Business Week, which is a bit misleading, I think. Southern Tidings went from weekly to, pardon me, to bi-weekly to monthly. Yes, they added color. The cost structure of the journal changed, but this is less immediate in the minds of the church members. The Pacific Union Recorder, counting the words per month and counting the items per month through 1975, it disappeared from the General Conference archives after 1979. I don't know why. But just picking up a copy from 1921, there were only 25 specific items or articles, and the wordage was much less. So, um, so there's much less content, making the church members aware of what's going on beyond their local congregation. That is changing the nature of community. Okay. The words per issue and the review, and I just had to do sampling. I usually took the third week in January and counted the words. Um, uh, uh, Adobe Acrobat gives you some tools to do that. I didn't count every word. There are about 191,000 pages over the 170 years, over 8,000 issues, which makes for about 340 million words. And the trend tends to be like that, with some dips understandable, during the Depression. My goodness, during the Depression, the General Conference was running a deficit, which not many people today remember. So camp meeting attendance has declined, the union journals, and the awareness of extra congregational community outside the congregation. I think these are my intuitive charts, has declined. So, and then the nature of institution and who is an employee has changed, and they're outsourcing. Well, they outsourced content from the very beginning, but they're outsourcing art and outsourcing distribution. A lot of publishing depends on the literacy of the audience, and literacy facilitates the spread of Adventism. This is why we do education. The dark on this map is illiteracy, age 10 and older. This came from some research, Oxford University Press. Look at the pattern. Illiteracy was rampant in the Deep South. Here's another version of that kind of estimate of illiteracy. Well, Adventism grew first in New England, and then the review moved to Rochester and then to Battle Creek, and it spread across this band from New England over to Iowa and Missouri. And that is the path of literacy in the United States in 1872. So literacy been very good to us. The early pioneers of Adventism were all born all over New England. And I missed one born in, who was it? Uh, Born in Portland, Maine. So adult literacy today still has this regional emphasis with illiteracy across the South and Texas. Pardon me, Linda. That explains a lot from Texas. Um, and so geographic literacy is another issue. Here's a plot of Americans trying to locate Ukraine on a world map. Um, I love this, a place where many high school seniors hope to visit someday. So, factors shrinking the market, and I'm watching the clock. The shrinking market for readers, competition from the attention economy, shorter attention span, particularly for Gen Z. They want simple ideas. I see this in the students. It's more difficult to promote a book. There are fewer avenues for advertising, and the retail marketing has changed. The retail market, Amazon may save the fanny of some publishers in that instead of going to Barnes and Nobles, which is still very full in my neighborhood, we get books on Amazon. And the door-to-door channel of selling is waning. So topics I haven't discussed here are the treatment of employees by the publishing houses. That's worthy of a whole hour. The commercial business revenue patterns. Again, to explore that, we need financial statements. The subscription policy for congregations. When I was in Sabbath school, and at the end of Sabbath school, they handed out junior guide. It never occurred to me that somebody had to pay for that. The economies of scale or diseconomies of merging publishing activity, the book pricing disparities, particularly pricing books for the benefit of colporteurs versus the membership market. Independent publications, haven't talked about that at all, and the distribution channels. One of my friends, his father was manager of the Review and Herald warehouse in Atlanta, Georgia. Why does the Review and Herald have a warehouse down in Atlanta? That puzzles me. Linda, uh, I, Lauren wanted me to talk about the youth instructor, but this is as far as we
Yes, I
got,
do.
and maybe we should throw it open to Q&A since Gerald already has raised his hand.
What do you think,
So
Lauren?
Oh, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the youth instructor. The youth instructor was a major part of my childhood. Uh, Carmen and I have a vivid memory of when we met, reading some old youth instructors that literally had a picture of the angels waiting outside of the movie theater door, and we were already rather cynical young ministerial people, and we got a good chuckle out of that. So anything you can say about the youth instructor for a few minutes, I would enjoy that.
okay, well, I'll go fast through a lot of my stuff. We've seen that the first this is the first issue of the youth instructor, came out of Rochester, New York in 1852. That's uh, when you launch a magazine, you have to talk to the potential audience, and that's what they're doing here. There was some graphics in there, and putting graphics into the printing process is always a challenge. Uh, the last page says it was published monthly by James White. It eventually evolved into more often than monthly. The object was to teach the young the commandments of God, the faith of Jesus, and correct understanding of the Holy Scripture. No mention of God's love. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, the kickoff article, The Law of God. I'm going to go fast through some of these. They even had ads for the railways that went through Battle Creek. The Review did this too. Strange
Hello?
advertisements for, yeah, I can hear you. They branched out into all kinds of hobbies. Here's one on elementary photography in 1900. Wow. Uh, uh, Essays about our anatomy and the animal world. Um, a whole series of articles on science, geology, meteorology, etc. If you're unemployed, here's an opportunity for a company in Battle Creek, Michigan, for you to sell whatever vaporizer they're making. There was a children's page in the Youth Instructor. And uh, pardon the 1902 caricatures of the trumpeters, but what is interesting here is the title, Suggestive Program for Young People's Meeting. So the word suggestive today has a second definition, tending to suggest something improper and indecent or risque. This is an example of how text written 110 years ago may not be appropriate for the modern audience. There are all kinds of changes in the language, okay? The aim of this section of the Youth Instructor, the Advent message to all the world in this generation. They wouldn't have conceived of this kind of delay. The types of content in the Youth Instructor, absolutely fascinating range. Of course, the devotional and the theology, and the Bible study guide, question and answers, articles about nature, science, etiquette for boys and girls, the radar scope, random news items unattributed from secular sources. That's when I was in church, that's what I read first. Morning watch calendars, mission stories, geography. I mean, descriptions of countries and cultures, health advice, biographies of significant personalities, both Adventist and non-Adventist, poetry, ads for colleges, hobbies, stamp collecting, photography, and things like that. Advice for men facing military service became very important in before World War I and in 1940. Tips for homemaking and cooking, amateur radio log listings, stories of pioneers, workers, worthy, heroic stories particularly, witnessing anecdotes by soldiers and others during World War II, reports on youth congress events, description of secular government entities, how the the Senate of the United States works, photography techniques and equipment, honor rolls. This particularly I appreciate, honor roll of missionaries that died in service. This was published in 1942. I may have some examples of it. Uh, that's something very close to my heart, giving recognition to people who made the ultimate sacrifice. Advice for relationships, courtship, and marriage, career advice, and descriptions of occupational specificity. They even had nature comic strips, Benny the Beaver, and there was a graphic novel about the life story of Joseph Bates. Uh, and of course, material on temperance. Lots of material on temperance. I'm going to jump to World War II, tell a personal story, and then I'll quit. Here are some of the youth instructor cover pages leading up to the war. Oh, by the way, nature calls has a different meaning in modern society. Okay, so again, we wouldn't use this literature today. Uh, Advice about work and the workplace. Caution against the effect of swing music on young people. Pay attention, Lauren. And of course, once the draft started, a lot of advice and help, thanks to Carlisle B. Haynes, the troops or those drafted into the Navy or Marines. About 20 years ago, I found a box after my mother died. She had saved 162 letters written by my father to his girlfriend, who later became my mother. And 162, some of them typed, some of them handwritten. He was assigned to a hospital, first in North Africa, and then the Italian campaign, and then France. I have these letters. I have been cataloging them and looking at them. One of the things he mentions is that, and this is a good thing that the church did, was to send youth instructors to all the troops in the mail. The Army mail wasn't immediately fast, but he got these youth instructors. One issue that he commented on that I found, he mentioned this in February of 1944. He was somewhere around Naples, Italy, and this article called "Climbing the Ladder" by Maureen Bloch. And it was very much focused on the Christian life. Are you growing? Is your Christian experience becoming richer every day? If not, you are backsliding. We are all climbing the ladder of Christian progress. To make progress, it is necessary to climb steadily. Once you stop, you slide back to the very bottom. Only those who are sinless will be saved when Jesus comes to claim his own. Just one sin will mean eternal death. This is what was in this article. And then there's several quotes, basically advising us to aspire to perfection and how to pray for perfection. So he responded in once he read that that conditions exist today. It was a very sobering article for my father, and he responded to that. This again is what I call midrash. This is the not severely edited material that goes out in publications, and that is a problem even today. That is enough about the youth instructor, and we can see how many people are left, 102.
Gosh, Michael, this is always such a whirlwind. And Jerry, before I come to you, let me just ask one brief question. Michael, do you have any sense at all of how the publishing arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church compares to other denominations in Christianity?
I think we did a lot more.
Okay.
It was central to the institutionalization of Adventism long before schools and long before sanitariums. But I
Okay.
don't have any solid stats on that.
Okay.
I will say that thanks to the General Conference archives, we have an extremely well documented history of the Adventist Church that's available to anyone with web access.
Hmm.
And I've been having a great time for the last few years going through all this stuff. I should get a life.
Well, for our sakes, we're glad you focus on this. So, Jerry, good to see you today. What are you thinking about?
Well, I'm appreciating Michael's panoply of a great institution that continues, and I'm a little surprised, Michael, that you didn't continue on into what currently exists as Adventist literature.
Yeah.
I suppose that you could say that ATSS is part of that. Various presence of internet manifestations of Adventism, posted sermons, all go on. But Linda, to answer your question, my thoughts were taken after looking at this in a bigger perspective than I ever thought I could. But thank you, Michael. Is there a difference now in the degree of ultra-processed feeding that's going on? Our present Secretary of Health and Human Services is on a warpath about ultra-processed food. Were early Adventist journals ultra-processed, or were they, in our perspective, more elemental, leaving more to, I hesitate to say this, but maybe leaving more to the guiding of the Holy Spirit in the individual mind? Is there an impression that you have from looking at all this stuff?
I do have an impression in looking at it that there was, and I think this is universal in human nature, there was a strong desire for detail and certainty.
Yes.
And so the detail, like that long series of articles on the minute details, events of the judgment.
Right, the investigative judgment.
That
Right.
to me was speculative, but it fed a need in the readership, or at least in the editorial attitudes. I got to process what you meant by processed. Uh, I if you look at the early journals, first of all, there's very narrow margins, no white space, and the font's very small. And I wonder about those poor folk who were visually impaired. And there is such volume of the text, so much of it weekly. That gives rise to room for speculation and a lot of other stuff. So they were drawing material from by the 1860s, 1870s. They were drawing material from a lot of other sources. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I gave it a try.
Yeah, I guess one of the examples that comes to my mind is today, if my wife's minivan's battery went dead, and I want to know what to do about diagnosing and replacing an alternator,
Okay.
I go on YouTube, and a guy
Yes.
shows me pictures of exactly
Yes.
what he does on my
Yes.
wife's particular van. That's ultra
Okay.
processed.
No, what's happening is digital media can be saved.
Yes.
And before, let's say before 1980 or 1990, you either had what went out over the air and is lost in the ether,
Right.
or you have what is printed on paper and preserved. And
True.
now with digital storage and the web, and actually the trivialization of cost of communication.
Yeah.
I never dreamt that I could call all over the country for free on my basic plan. So digital storage enabled text, images, video, sermons, and digital the lower cost of digital storage. And I'm still trying to get my brain around that, but that has enabled a lot of mediocrity on the web, on YouTube and elsewhere.
It has. And my impression is that today's generation, I talk about them as if they're somebody other than myself, wants absolute minutia, answering their question and nothing else. Nothing extraneous. I
No
don't
context.
no context even. I don't want to
Yeah.
think about it. I just want the answer. And it occurs to me that early Adventism was a lot about personal searching. And it was like we were in this together. At least it felt that way for
Yes.
a time.
The early Adventist Review was, I would describe it as egalitarian. Uh,
Yes.
they published the names of every letter that they got, even if they didn't publish the letter. And eventually, into the 1860s and 1870s, it was a Donnybrook of debates over minute doctrine, and the debates raged almost belligerently from time to time, not just letters to the editor, but I will give $100 to anyone that can prove to me from the Bible XYZ.
Right.
That blossomed in the 1870s.
Right. And it occurs to me that today you don't have any of that. It is
No.
all ultra processed, and there's an answer. And by golly, maybe you better know the right answer. Don't ask those questions because we'll make a judgment.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Different culture. Very different.
Thank
You
you.
know, thank you, Jerry. And it leads to a question for me, which is, in the trajectory of Adventist publishing, has there at any point, as you sort of laid out the history for us, where any type of need assessment was done in terms of, what the readership was interested in, or was it all just top-down supposition?
No. There was need assessment. The best
Yeah.
example is discontinuing the youth instructor and beginning Insight magazine. And the editors of Insight made great effort to be in touch with the readership.
Okay.
Good.
Well, thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Michael. Karsten, I'm coming to you. I'm asking you to unmute, if you will. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you for an incredibly fascinating trip through history. And it gives me a sense of perspective where we've come from collectively and individually that I think is extremely valuable. And I think one of the things that young people today is don't realize our history and how that actually has flown into their lives and is an important part of our environment. But you had some graphs previously where you called them your subjective impression of certain trends. And there I have a very specific question, and that has to do with the openness of Adventist inwardly facing literature in terms of promoting and accepting doctrinal and other types of debate. That's one category. And another category is dealing with scandal. Which the independent press also excels in today. And then benchmarking that over time and comparing that to the way the Bible dealt with doctrinal discussions and scandals. I mean, we wouldn't write about the president of the General Conference or somebody high leader looking at a beautiful woman taking her evening bath on the rooftop and then sending her husband off to war. But the Bible was incredibly open about those type of things. So it's the scandal things and the doctrinal discussion things. How have they progressed over time?
Okay. That's the best question I've heard in months. Because and obviously I'm missing some slides that I should have put in. In the early review, first of all, they were very open about the finances. And so even before there were conferences, there were missionary and tract societies. And the review printed the financial statements of those quarterly and where the money went. The review also printed the home addresses of the pioneers, of the leaders, so you could write them a letter. The review also printed the expense reports of James and Ellen White. So much money to travel to this city, wherever they were, Columbus, Ohio, or up to Portland, Maine. That's tremendous candor and openness. The review also had some items about a couple being disfellowshipped because man and a wife, not married, disfellowshipped because they traveled together in the gospel work. And so there was candor about uh, uh, candor about the doctrinal battles, very much through, I would say, 1910. There wasn't an oppressive culture like there is today. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And, has that gone gradually downhill since 1910 to
Yeah,
today?
I think so. I
Yeah,
think so. There was very little ink about the Davenport scandal, for example.
right. And it also seems, I mean, when I was listening to the financial report yesterday, the refusal of the church to do consolidated financial statements, that has been a longstanding policy. And I looked in some of the statistics and I couldn't find it. And,
What do you
they
mean
talk about,
by consolidated, that the balance sheets of the conferences are rolled up into the
no, the
union?
consolidated of the entire church organization from the
Does that,
GC down through the
yeah,
divisions and so on, and institutions. If you look
well,
at,
yeah,
and,
go ahead.
generally accepted accounting practices say that when you have a large corporation, you have to include all subsidiaries, and they are not doing that. The financial report is only for the GC in Washington, D.C.
That that's right, because you use the S word. The union conferences are not subsidiaries of the general conference, in spite of a visual depiction of that in an org chart. The general conference is a joint venture of the union conferences, and that is most evident in the nominating committee, because the nominating committee is at the GC session is mainly made up of union conference presidents. They have a lot of power. So
Right.
and the other issue is, if you roll up the foreign divisions into the GC, uh, on what basis do you do the currency conversion? That
Sure.
gets a
But
little
that has to
messy.
do with any multinational corporation. That's always an
Oh
issue.
yeah, yeah, but
Nothing to do with
the divisions are subsidiary, and should the joint finances of the Far Eastern Division roll up? That's a good question.
Well, I think so also because the church controls it all the way down to the local congregations. As you look at the changing in the working policies, they are just tightening the noose, autumn council by autumn council. And if you control a subsidiary and you control the universities and the hospitals and so on, I mean, they report they have so many hospitals and so many
Yeah,
universities and so on, but they will not add up the totals.
writing policy does not necessarily mean control.
Well, if you look at it from the outside, it appears to be that way. In practice,
Yeah.
they may
Oh,
not have it,
yeah. Image and reality are a little different.
right? But there is a nuclear option in the
Yeah,
constitutions. And
yeah.
because there is that nuclear option, they, I feel, are morally obligated to report on on the subsidiaries to which the nuclear option can be exercised.
I'm so glad you're here today. No, seriously, that's
Wait,
good stuff.
Karsten, what do you mean by the nuclear option? I'm not as familiar with the inner
Well,
work.
there was this issue when I believe some homosexual couple from California wanted to move back to Colorado and join the original home church where he grew up in. And the local congregation voted on it, and they were fairly split on it. And then the conference president from the Colorado conference came in and says, if you permit this, we can disfellowship you as a congregation. That's a nuclear option.
Okay,
And there
that's
also is a nuclear option where conferences can be thrown out and unions can be thrown out of the fellowship.
You've done your homework.
Ted Wilson, during his tenure, has hinted at the nuclear option, but never dared to trigger it.
well, and if what I read just in the summary version about our new General Conference president is a hallmark of his leadership and the Southern, down in South America, was centralization of power, was it not? I mean, am I correct in that?
That is according to the things that we read, and I'm just saying I want to see how it plays out. because the centralization of power has certainly gone on. When you read the 2025 orders, what do you call the rules of the meeting orders for the General Conference, and I went through the whole document there, and there is just step by step that the guy who manages the meeting can refuse to recognize anybody, and can refuse to even recognize points of order, and can refuse to recognize new proposals. That's how tight it's getting. And they had to do that due to the COVID, vaccination thing, to keep it from running off the tracks.
Carson, I really appreciate the depth that you've brought to this for us. Thank you. Thank you so much. Michael, is there anything you want to add?
Karsten, you are scary. That's great.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I've worked in.
Done your homework.
I've lived in the evil outside world ever since I finished at Andrews University, and had heard about all these terrible people out in industry. And one of the fundamentals in a well-run company is honesty. It's also being honest in terms of looking at yourself. That internal, shall we say, loyal opposition is very much appreciated by CEOs, because it helps keep them on track. It keeps them open to inspiration, creativity, and new strategies, and so on. And I get so sad when I see what goes on in a church that I'm pretty well born into.
It's for the last 20 years I have been working with CEO groups, and I have seen a change exactly as you have described, where business owners are today, particularly younger ones, much more willing to be transparent about the company's finances. And they have found that it does create a more comfortable and more loyal set of employees when they have some understanding of what's happening. So thank you for that. Thank you, Carson.
Thank you.
Ed, good to see you. I'm asking you to unmute there.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is not what I planned to talk about, but Karsten got me stirred up. First of all, I live in the Colorado Conference. The decision to threaten the Boulder Church with disbanding it comes from the conference, not from the General Conference. So that particular nuclear option, if we can state it that way, was a local matter. And so that's one point. The second point is, as an old chief financial officer, if we brought external auditors in, say Ernst & Young or Price Waterhouse or whoever, and said we want consolidated financial statements for the entire church, I think they would have a difficult time putting together the indicators of what would allow a consolidation. Because consolidation usually means that everything is a controlled entity. And I'm not at all certain that the union conferences and the local conferences are controlled entities by the GC.
No, they aren't.
As a matter of fact, we saw that play out in real time in the meetings back between, 2014 and 2018 of the General Conference, when when Ted was trying to discipline those unions that voted to ordain women. He was unable to do so. Despite all the storm and the words and the anger, he did not succeed, because he cannot. He does not have that authority or power. The legal formation documents for conferences and unions create a separation that the GC cannot control. I had a lengthy conversation with the general counsel of the General Conference maybe 20 years ago, and I pushed him really hard. Obnoxiously hard, on purpose. And I posed a situation in which somebody, a conference or a union or an institution, was really out of bounds. And I said, what can the GC do about it? Well, we can call a meeting of their constituency and we can go talk to them and threaten them. I said, yeah, but can you do anything? Well, no. And he went through a whole series of things like this, which all amounted to a bunch of noise. And finally, when I pushed him as far as I could push him, he said there are two things where we have the right to act. Number one is in the United States, church institutions get their tax exemption through the General Conference. The General Conference has a group exemption. And anybody that's listed in the yearbook, the annual yearbook, gets tax exemption through that tax exemption, but they can throw people out. That's one thing. The other thing was the use of the name.
Mm-hmm.
The General Conference controls the name and the legal rights to it.
Yeah.
And I told this story once in front of the current GC. As a matter of fact, I told it to him directly on the phone. He called me and I went through this story and he said, well, that's about right. Taxation and use of the name. That's what the GC controls. But in terms of what gets voted at the local level, they don't have it. The perception is that they do because they are promoting that perception.
Yeah.
And I get very frustrated that our people at the union level and even division level and the conference level don't push back on that. Because whatever you do informally becomes, it might be still informal, but it's powerful.
Influential.
And pardon me?
Influential.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be that way. In my opinion, somebody should have stood up during all those lengthy meetings where the heat ran high and Ted was pushing for discipline for these unions and said, sir, you are the problem. We are not going there. You might as well drop this. But nobody did. I don't know if it's politeness or deference or fear. I don't know what the problem is. But we do see an aggregation of informal power that doesn't need to exist. Sorry about the soapbox. What I really wanted to say, Michael, was I feel like our denominational publications have gone off in a corner where they essentially do two or three things and not much else. They promote a doctrinal perspective continuously. Number one. Number two, they never cover the real issues which Adventists today and Spectrum might cover, which are legitimate issues with the church. You don't see that stuff. It's not transparent. And the third thing they do really well is promotional. The church is doing this wonderful thing. The church is doing that wonderful thing. And frankly, I don't consider them real. They are instruments of the administration at any given time. And tell whatever message that is wanted at the level of leadership. And the openness you described about publication of financial statements and all that sort of thing in earlier years, that's totally lacking. Mm-hmm. So they've become mouthpieces for a small group of people. And
in their bubble.
Yeah, in their bubble. Yeah, thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Well,
Linda,
Michael, please.
May I real quickly share my screen?
Sure.
This is a chart I did back in the 1980s of the specific interactions between the elements of church structure. and you'll see that the center of the chart is the Union Conference president.
Yes.
And he helps select the conference president by virtue of being on the conference nominating committee. There are similar to metabolic pathways in biochemistry, there is a dynamic balance of influence between all these elements of the organization. And I guess I could create a video, an hour-long video, walking you through each one of these lines. But
Oh
the
dear heavenly
union,
Dave. Let's not say we did.
the union paper, the sessions, the executive committees, the constituency sessions. It's really complex, and so the concept of a subsidiary conference being a subsidiary of the union doesn't work.
Well, and you know what? It was Marshall McLuhan who said the medium is the message. And boy, if that doesn't fit here, I don't know what does. The medium is out of touch, the medium is irrelevant, and that's the message. You wouldn't disagree with me, would you, Michael?
Yes, I wouldn't word it that way, but I want to hear what George has to say.
Well, Jerry, this is your fault because you talked about ultra processed stuff. So, all right. So, George, good to see you. Go ahead and unmute.
Okay, you really want to hear what I have to say, really? Number one, nobody should be surprised that Ayrton Keller was elected, because I have been stating this fact since 2021. Since the day he was taken from the division in the middle of his term to be a secretary at the GC. That day, from that day on, I was telling, this is the new president after Ted Wilson at any time. And bingo, I am now considered a true prophet. But my point that was triggered by Karsten, so it's again his fault, is that those of you in the audience, there are many people who are at the GC. I have a task for you. Ask him, Ayrton Keller, if you have the chance, ask him if when he was the president of the division, South American division, if he hired a third-party non-Adventist business company to, in secret, investigate the social media of all pastors and workers. Ask him if it's true or not. Don't let him talk. I say it's a yes or no question. Did you hire a company that was investigating workers' social media in secret? This is one question. A second question for him would be, was there in Brazil at least one pastor fired as a result of such a espionage of social media? And this will start coloring his person as a GC president. Just ask the question, let's see what he says. And make it a yes or no question. No explanation needed. And let's see what happens. And I will leave it here.
Thank you, George. Karsten, did you just have a brief rejoinder? Then I'm asking you to unmute. Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
just wanted a quick comment to Ed's very good input. I agree with you that from a legal standpoint, it's probably not possible to consolidate. But I'm looking at it more from a moral standpoint. When the church in the first day in the reports tithe income of about $2 billion or something like that. In terms of us who pay for the party, it is part of their stewardship responsibility to us to tell how that money is used or misused, and that you cannot see from anywhere. And that's the problem that I have when I ask for consolidated. And also, I think there is also, and I'd like an opinion on that, Ed, using an Adventist auditor to audit the church financial statements, isn't there a potential conflict of interest there?
Michael, do you have any follow-up?
I'm not going to touch that. No.
I understood.
Well, okay. I think it is appropriate to create aggregate metrics as long as you are fully disclose the weakness of those metrics as they are constructed. For example, exchange rates. I teach workshops in data visualization and charting and metrics, and any metric of any organization is probably going to need up to 5 or more footnotes explaining the details of how you arrived at that number. And oxygen-deprived executives don't want to look at the footnotes. They don't want to take the time. So a lot of people make decisions based on high-level representations of reality, and we'll never get away from that.
Right. Thank you. Richard, welcome. What are your thoughts or questions today?
Just a question about publishing, or a comment about publishing. You know, the newest book about Ellen White, put together by a bunch of moderate Adventist scholars, was partially printed and then stopped by the GC. I think was referenced on one of these. And so you see control still being exercised in keeping what I understand, I'd like to get my hands on it, is a very good, balanced view of Ellen White, is now, at least for the moment, not available. I don't know who owns the copyright of it. If Pacific Press is the one that stopped it. So I don't know if anybody has any comments about when we might be able to get our hands on that book. I hear it's really well done, and I'd like to read it. It's a very balanced view of Ellen White by Jonathan Butler, etc., Eric Anderson, and so on. Thank you.
Richard, someone did post it on Internet Archive for free. I contacted Eric Anderson. I said, do you know that people are giving your book away for free? And he said, I think it was inevitable the moment they pulled it off the shelf that somebody was going to just go ahead and say, hey, you can't stop this anymore. So it is out there. Look at the Internet Archive and look up the title. It'll be right there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There's no more gold in those books.
Bjorn, before I come to you, let me just see if, Ed, do you have a brief rejoinder to share in the context of the previous conversation? I'm asking you to unmute. There you go.
Thank you. I want to answer Karsten's question about the auditors and conflict of interest. First of all, historically, and I don't know how it is currently now. I've not had interactions with the church auditors for a long time. I've had a lot of interaction with external auditors. And it used to be that the biggest flaw in the GC auditing service was that nobody paid any attention. There was among church leadership, an active disdain for the work of the auditors, particularly about policy violations, and they would just openly ignore them if they didn't like what they said. I sat on one of our university boards for 25 years, and it had the same auditor commented about something they were doing out of policy for all 25 of those years. Never got fixed. As to their independence, I think that audit service has improved a lot over the last few decades. It's much more professional than it used to be. I really don't have good insights into their independence, but we should always remember they are internal auditors. Nobody, if you took their audited financial statements to a bank and wanted to borrow money, it's not likely that they would be viewed as legitimate. Maybe so, because our colleges borrow money all the time. But so they're not truly independent, but it's a lot better than it used to be.
What
Michael?
what you're describing in the brethren's reaction to the auditors is a classic example of cultural triumphalism. We can do no wrong. So that does not surprise me at all. That triumphalism has been there for many, many years. It's a useful word.
It is a good word. So am I to understand then, based on what some are saying, is that the publishing houses are just simply cost and or profit centers within the church itself organization, or are they separate entities?
They are separate legal organizations, but they structurally have, just like the colleges, they structurally have written in or baked into their structure the control from the conferences and the GC and or the union conference, whoever is involved. So the Pacific Press mandates a certain number of GC people control on their board. Same thing with universities.
Yeah,
And so
that's true. What he says is accurate in my experience, that they all are corporations, but they're controlled by some denominational entity legally, usually by the appointment of board members and approval of bylaws and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But one problem with the auditing service, not that this program's about auditing, is timeliness. I just recently resigned from the board of Faith for Today, and their year ended December 31, and you'd be lucky if you got your audit report by the next December 31. Terrible timeliness. And I don't know if they're understaffed or what, but enough about that.
all right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it. Bjorn, welcome. Good to see you. Are you in St. Louis?
Yeah, I am, and I hope you can hear me because my internet
Yes.
is not great either. But
Yes,
wonderful. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Michael, for the presentation. Being here at the GC session, I'm seeing, like, walking through the exhibition hall and talking to people and kind of seeing what we're in the. We have the sheep and the goats situation here with media covering the event. So there's church media, and they get to sit somewhere else. We haven't gotten to visit that area. And then we're with the external media. We're like with the unwashed kind of people in another section, peering over the crowd. But I'm wondering if listening to press conferences and hearing from different media outfits, I feel like Adventist publishing, in the traditional sense, may be on the way out and maybe losing a readership. But audiences for new publishing, I think, are exploding. Like with the fragmentation of Adventist media, where it's becoming regional and it's becoming less controlled by sort of legacy publishing. I think audiences and efforts for various kinds of publishing are actually growing and are actually much larger than they've ever been. So would you accept that kind of a challenge to the narrative, that it's actually much bolder and much bigger nowadays? And I'll add one last little observation, in that I heard actually very bold questions coming from the global South for Urgent Kohler last night, which I was not expecting. I was expecting them to be a lot more deferential, but no, they were pushing, and they were kind of campaigning. Even Brazilians were there asking him hard questions, and that's not typically been the case. So do you think Adventist publishing actually is flourishing, but just in a different format?
I can't speak to that today because I don't sample all of Adventist publishing. I believe the content has gone down for the inward-facing journals, and I think it's also gone down. The volume of content's gone down for the outward-facing journals. The big issue is the explosion of competition for eyeballs, and the all the different sub media of web, the streaming, blogs, etc. And uh, at one church I visit, there's a guy that blogs weekly, and I'm curious. Okay, how many people are actually reading it, and is it more of a cathartic or narcissistic activity than really
Like Dear
productive?
Diary. Yeah.
Yeah, and uh, so you always have to ask the question: what is the message? What is the audience? And how effective is it?
Thanks.
It's interesting too. I was going to say, where was Aunt Sevy this week? I didn't see Aunt Sevy in what came out. Was there an Aunt Sevy?
No, because we are getting ready to leave. I skipped Aunt Sebi, and instead I put in a piece about choosing the General Conference president. So
Well, I just want, as a voice of one, I just want you to know that Aunt Sevy is really popular, and you should
it is.
proceed cautiously when you choose to omit it.
The piece that I posted was one of our most popular pieces in terms of traffic too. It was the one entitled "I don't really care who the General Conference president is,"
Right.
and the truth is, I really don't, even now that I know who it is. Let me say a couple of things here. First of all, coming up, I had Eric Anderson scheduled for next week, to talk about the book and about everything that happened with the book. And Eric had the best of all excuses for canceling on us. He's going to be in the hospital, and it's for a procedure. He assured me that he was not at death's door. It was a procedure that he had to have, but he said, "There's no way I'm going to be able to teach for you." So Bjorn and I and Nicole decided that next week is going to be the last Sabbath of the GC, that we are going to do a little presentation for you, the three of us, and talk about what's going on and let you talk with us. We'll have a lot more information by then. I mean, even though the GC president is the big thing, remember, there's some other big decisions that are coming up too. No big changes in the fundamental beliefs that I know of, nothing like that. But one of the interesting decisions is going to be um, who is going to step into the executive secretary spot, because that's always been, sort of, the vice president is thought of as the guy that could be president next. So that's going to be an interesting question. And I actually think they're going to probably be spending more time on that than they will on selecting the president. The president had already been kind of a given, and there you go. The other thing I want to say is that then after, you guys are going to have to listen to us amateurs next week. We're just ordinary folks who are sitting around listening to the general conference. We are suffering this for you.
Would you describe it as a post-mortem?
Well, something like that. But we're doing this for you. But then the week after that, I've got Signy Tonstead coming, who is always popular and just a great teacher. And then I have, after that, I have Lawrence Turner from the UK. I'm still a little open in part of August, but before my friend Steve Ferguson goes back to Perth, Australia, where he has to wake up at 3 a.m. in order to teach for us. He's still in Europe, and he said, yeah, he'll teach for us one more time. He's going to talk about how how Adventists use or misuse the Bible. He said, we really don't have a really good hermeneutic of why the Bible is important or what it does. And then on the 30th, I don't know, have our topic yet, but a very popular teacher from Southern University named Lisa Diller is going to be with us. So you know what's coming up next. Just keep it. And if nobody shows up next week because it's us amateurs, we'll know that we need to keep the professionals teaching for us. Michael, just a couple of random things that have gone by in my head here. I have an interesting observation as I walk around, as I look at what happened with Reclaiming the Prophet, and then I walk around all the publishing firms in the exhibition hall here. And I think that there is still a sense among the Adventist insiders that they still have control of the narrative somehow. I don't know how they think that, but I think they actually have a sense of confidence that, yeah, we're still in control of all of this, even though there's only one publishing house left, and anybody can publish anything anywhere. I could be wrong. I think smarter minds like Dale Galusha probably realize that's not the case. But isn't it interesting that when they decided that they wanted to publish a book about Ellen White, they said, please, Pacific Press, publish this for us so that it is somehow regarded as real and official and part of our group. And they were disappointed when it didn't work out as they liked. Interestingly, Eric says, I don't think they'd mind at all if they won't pick it up again, which they might. He said, I don't think they'd mind at all if we picked up our manuscript and published it ourselves or took it somewhere else. He said, they probably let us. But they both wanted it that way, and the church apparently wanted it to be published that way. They thought there was something good in it. And then others came along and said that it isn't the case. Number two, and this has to do with what you said about inward-facing media and outward-facing media. I think the inward-facing media is, I could be wrong, but I think it's in trouble. I don't know, when I talk to my pastor friends, I don't know too many who cite articles from Ministry Magazine, let's say. When I was a pastor, I would talk to people about things that were in the review. It was rare that people would say, I read this article in the review. Even though people got it, or the Adventist World, whatever the current thing to send everybody is. I remember years ago, Marvin Moore was my conservative friend. He and I got along just great, even though he knew I was on opposite from him. Marvin was an honest man. And I remember talking to him one time, and he said, you know, Lauren, the signs of the times was this many 100,000 at this date, and then it was this many, and then it's this many. And he said, it keeps going down. And I said, well, why don't you do something about that? He said, it is impossible for us. He admitted this to me. He said, it is impossible for us to change it because the moment we change it to try to find a different audience, we lose the heavy supporters that we have now. He said, we're trapped. Yeah. We're trapped. And I said, so are we going to get to the point where this major nameplate in the Adventist church is gone? He said, yeah, it's probably inevitable. He said, it'll stumble along for some years, but we cannot seem to upgrade it in a way that we can make the transition between the traditional supporters who are dying and possible new supporters who might like it if we did the right thing with it. So I thought that was interesting. And my third point is simply this. You didn't mention much about them, but the things that made the biggest impact on a lot of us who are multi-generational SDAs is the little friend, the primary treasure, the junior guide. Those were a major, major part of my childhood. And I enjoyed them because they were stories. I also was given and they had pictures, sometimes like the little cartoons and things. Sometimes I have to, as I look back, I think a lot of the spiritual malpractice that they fed us about, the child who disobeys mommy and gets hit by the meteor or whatever. I don't know, some crazy stuff like that they did back then. Along with Uncle Arthur, there wasn't very sophisticated moral teaching there ever. And I suppose that's to be expected. But a lot of the twisted theology I got probably originated there that I've had to work on throughout my life. And yet, those were the things that kept me in the church or kept me an Adventist because Mom sat down and read them to us every night.
Yeah, they were all works-based. They were all based on salvation by works. And
Yep.
Michael, before you respond to Lauren, I sort of have a question that goes along with it as it pertains to inward-facing publishing. You talked about, you had slides talking about pop doctrines, which tended to be things that were, perhaps by some characterization, more controversial. And I wonder what, if anything, does the institutional church do with those? Do they relate to them, or is it just head in the sand? What would you say?
They ignore them. I think
point?
they ignore them because they don't disrupt the flow of tithe. And so there's an economic component to relationships in the church. And the pop doctrines, I think, are a significant problem in the spiritual lives of individual members. I don't know if I did for this audience the survey of the anxiety of Adventism.
You did, yes.
Yeah, and the fear of not being saved, that came through in the obituaries. It comes through in casual conversation. That's a problem, but it doesn't disrupt the flow of tithe, to be crass. Lauren, as far as the many publishers with booths there in the exhibit hall, that's interesting. That is just all the more uncontrolled and more Wild West in theology.
Yeah, they're wrong. They don't control it anymore. But isn't it interesting that when Merlin Burt wrote that response from the GC from the White Estate, he said, "Thank you for this good, faithful publishing house that has the courage to say no to bad theology." And there you go. So they still think of themselves as being gatekeepers in some way.
Yeah. Well, editors and publishers are gatekeepers to
We are.
ideas. Yeah.
Am I
We
the only
are.
one here who doesn't understand where what is it, the oak and acorn came from? What is that? Is it a separate publishing house or division of Pacific Press?
Well, anybody can have a publishing house at this point in time. This just happens to be one that the Pacific Union has decided to have their own nameplate, Oak and Acorn. That's all. It's basically Ray Tate's and the Pacific Union, and they get manuscripts and they say we'll publish things that others won't. And so it's kind of
It's a slightly more semi-official because it is published by one of the judicatories, but it's not a publishing firm as such. It is
There's no
a
brick and
couple.
no brick and mortar there.
No,
Oh,
it's a couple of guys at a computer editing the manuscript that comes in and sending it to Amazon to publish for them.
in their garage. Huh? All right, I have one last really mundane question. Why is it that my union still sends out their report every month in hard copy? Is mine the only one? Was it the Southern Recorder or something? I forget what it's exactly.
Southern Tidings, come
Southern
on.
Tidings. That's it. That's it. I mean,
No, there still is a good feeling in curling up in front of the fire with a paper document compared to trying to balance your iPad on your lap. There's still a feeling about paper.
it's not even good for kindling, my barbecue grill. But anyway, and Michael, I just want you to know too, you're dating yourself because it's not the Book and Bible House anymore. It's the ABC.
The slide was correct, ABC, aka Book and
I
Bible
heard you
House.
say Book and Bible House.
I know what I said because I was talking to an elderly audience.
Oh my good. Yes, indeed. And in fact, we are. Anyway, thank you so much, Michael.
I try to meet the audience.
Yeah, I think you did. Oh, I see Karsten here and wants to make a closing comment. Karsten, if you can.
Yeah, I
say
can't
something
shut up. I'm sorry.
briefly.
Yeah, I mean, we've been at the receiving end of the nonconformance things in Denmark. And the brutality that we have experienced is unspeakable from the division or from the General Conference. It is unchristian. It is snubbing us. It's ignoring us, backstabbing, and so on. It's just so sad to see. And these are the type of things where when I think of stewardship, and I know there's the financial reporting things, but there has to be a responsibility for the way that the leadership treats their members and the officers of the unions who've borne that badge of shame for over 5 years now, that was applied with respect to women's ordination. And these are the type of things that they don't realize the collateral damage that causes in the church. The majority of members, I believe, shall we say, faithful, regular members, they have a very simple attitude. We just want to know nothing about what's going on in the General Conference. We have a well-functioning church locally here, and we just have to ignore the rest to keep our mental sanity.
How fortunate for you. I'm so glad you have that local congregation, Karsten. Thank you so much. I'm glad you were here today. So Lauren, back to you if you want to wind up.
I just want to remind you that next week it's going to be your Adventist Today General Conference team who's going to be doing the Adventist Today Sabbath Seminar. I may try to loop in a guest or two if we can find a space to do that. But this is going to be questions and answers. Think of some questions this week that you would like to have us answer. We'll try to do. I may try to throw together as some sort of presentation. We'll be writing all week. The first 2 days, I wrote 2 pieces a day, and mine are a little different. Bjorn's are very detailed. He's going point by point, whereas I just write the essence of the things that matter to me. And they may not matter to you, but I just like yesterday when they came to the auditor's report, I said, this stuff makes my insides shrivel up. I said, the bottom line is they did okay. If you want to know more than that, you're going to have to ask somebody else. So that's kind of the attitude that we're taking here. We'll try to get the important stuff. Oh, and have fun looking at Nicole's videos. Nicole is running around
talking to people, asking them how they feel about what's going on, and we'll be doing that all week too. So, hey, love you guys. Have a great day. We're going to sign off here. We took a break from the America Center today, and we're just hanging out in here where we are. It is an absolute. By the way, if you've never been here, you don't want to come. It is absolutely the worst convention center I have ever seen in my life. It is sprawling. You can't go indoors. You have to like walk around this building that is just huge. And sometimes you have to walk around like for a half a mile just to get into a door. And then they'll have it like chained up. And it is just an ugly designed place. It's hard to even figure out where you're at. And I don't know why they chose it. It's just such a bad design.
Ed says it must have been cheap.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure it was. I'm sure between it's going to be from here on out probably between St. Louis and Indianapolis, and because they're the sort of the heartland where nobody really wants to go. But I think it's don't you say, Bjorn? It's just an awful maze cave of a place.
Oh yeah, it's my pastor back home, he went to the one during COVID kind of, and which was the exact same location. He was like, Bjorn, he was like, St. Louis is a hole. And he was talking about the just the whole layout. It's not ideal, but I was doing some research, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, they have use of the center. They got a very, very good deal of it. If it wasn't completely cost free because of the business that the masses of people are bringing to the town. So anyway, they've got a very good deal. So that's why this makes a lot more sense than a sexier location.
Yeah, there's a joke that I heard somebody tell, and this has been told many times before, but I still think it's funny. It said the Seventh Adventists came to town with the Ten Commandments and a $10 bill, and they didn't break either of them.
That's an indictment. That's an indictment.
But to end it on a positive note, it is the fun part is seeing people, and I think that
right.
holds for everybody. It's just meeting people that you haven't seen since 20 years ago, whatever, is lovely. So that's the family reunion part for every convention.
That's fun.
Is fun.
Although I will say this, I was talking to Darius Yankovic yesterday, and he and I agreed. I said probably 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have walked around and known more people. I've been retired for what, I don't know, close to 7 years now. And first of all, there's just tons of people that are in positions of a responsibility that I just don't know anymore. And the other part is that some people don't seem to know me. I passed by a guy who was my conference president yesterday and said hi to him, and he was so old he didn't even recognize me. And so we just walked on. And he said, Darius said too, he said, I have a few students that I run into, but I'm feeling more of a stranger in the crowd than I probably would have 20 years ago. And I get that. That's kind of how I'm feeling. There's for all the fact that in so many of the Adventist churches, I'll probably talk about this next week too. In so many Adventist churches I visit, there's hardly any young people, young adults, nothing. Here, you come here and you see a lot of young people, and most of them are on the fringe in these fringe ministries or working for the GC or one of the colleges. But go to your average church as you're traveling across the country, and you won't see anybody under 25. Yeah. It'll be all gray heads. So that's kind of encouraging, and it's kind of weird too. I'm not quite sure what to do with that.